Hello and welcome to this. Sorry,
Julie taking a poorly timed drink of something.
pulling some coffee out of my mouth. Pardon. Um,
Start as we mean to go on.
Thank you so much for joining us for
Wait,
this.
Are we live?
Yeah.
Yes.
Oh, okay.
Are we? Why does it say we're not?
No, but mine says we're not. So
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, no, we are. I'm looking at us on my phone. We are.
Okay.
I am sorry. That was totally
All
unnecessary
good.
for me
No,
to
no,
interrupt. I'm so sorry.
no, you are fine. I was just telling people, welcome to this another installment of Three Girls, One Book. In this one, we have decided to read the novel Lone Women by Victor LaValle. And this is classified as a literary horror novel, I guess would be
Yeah.
is that accurate? I don't know. We'll talk about that later. But yeah. Before we get started, just gotta say, spoilers. Spoilers will be divulged. We will be talking about anything and everything. But Sarah is kind enough to still give a brief synopsis of the novel for those who would like that. So, Sarah, kick it off for us.
All right. So Lone Women, that takes place in the early 20th century in Montana, very early 20th century, at the point that homesteading is still a thing where people can go live on a plot of land, in the wilderness. And if they are able to stay on that land and farm it for a certain amount of time, the federal government gives them that land. So this is still the era of homesteading, and this is happening in Montana. Our main character, Adelaide, is a Black woman who comes from California, leaving behind her dead parents and family home, which she has set on fire, and we are not entirely clear what has happened there for a very long time in the book. But she comes north to Montana, understanding that there are no restrictions as far as gender or race on homesteading. So what she plans to do is take up a homesteading claim in Montana and make a life for herself there. She carries with her as she goes a very large, very heavy trunk that she is very concerned about anybody opening or getting near, and that also does not get explained quite what's going on there for a fair amount of time in the book. So she comes to Montana, and while she's there, starts meeting a variety of people. There's neighbors Grace and Grace's young son, who become friends with her. Adelaide is kind of a difficult character because she's very closed off, as one might expect from somebody who literally keeps the physical embodiment of her rage and trauma locked in a trunk, which we'll get into later. But she slowly starts making friends with some of the local people. There is also locally a lesbian couple, interracial lesbian couple, Black and Chinese, who run a sort of I guess a speakeasy kind of thing, as well as a laundry she makes friends with. And then there are also some sort of upstanding white citizens running the nearby town who turn out to be quite evil, as well as a gang of a marauding family of a mother and young sons who also are criminals trying to take advantage of Adelaide and other people that they run across. And so as the story goes, it's all about Adelaide getting to know all of these people. It's all about discovering what it is she's keeping locked in her trunk, and where that came from, and how that's affected her life. And yeah, I mean, I guess we can leave it at that. That's the setup. That's the setup for the book. So
Thank you very much.
Setup. Yes, definitely.
Very good. Very good. So let's start off with, like we did last time, a general rating here. If we're going to go 1 to 5, 5 being fantastic, 1 being piece of shit, what would you rate this novel? So Sarah.
So this for me was a 4-star read. It was a book that I feel like I appreciated on an intellectual level more than I connected to it on an emotional level. Um, so it was one of those books where it was like I enjoyed it. The writing was really good. The characterization was well done. The setting was really interesting, and just from an intellectual standpoint, I could see what the author was trying to do, and I felt like he executed that really well. It wasn't a book that I like loved, like it wasn't one of those books that I felt super like emotionally involved in or emotionally committed to, but I did think it was a good book. It was well done. It was one of those books it was a book that I admire rather than really loving, I guess is how I would characterize it. So
Okay, I'm next. And I actually would agree with that. So, I mean, originally I was going to say I'd give it maybe like 3 stars, but maybe it should be, I don't know. It's kind of down the middle for me because, like Sarah said, from an intellectual standpoint, I really can respect what Victor LaValle did in the novel. And especially after finishing it and then reflecting, going back to reread certain parts, really thinking about the whole setup of everything, I could appreciate it all the more. And this was a novel that I was seriously considering DNFing at a certain point. So the fact that luckily, both Heather and Sarah were like, no, there shit happens. Shit does happen, especially at the end. So just like, just soldier on. And I'm actually glad I did. I am actually glad I did. So, similar to Sarah, I appreciated it from a craft perspective.
Mhm.
An intellectual perspective. It wasn't a page turner for me, honestly. It wasn't something that, really emotionally grabbed me. It didn't even horrify me, really. Given that it's a horror, I was just like kind of unengaged at times. So there was that. So from an emotional standpoint, it didn't quite do it for me. But I still think it is a well-crafted book.
Mhm.
Yeah, I would also actually give it a 4-star, I think. And I had such a like you, Julie, I almost got to a point where I was like I might DNF this if putting a butt pushed through. And I loved the beginning and I loved the end. And there was just a period in the middle where it really lulled for me. And I think the end made up for it and it paid off. But there was a period of time when I was like, this is not the book I was expecting. And it's not enough of a horror. And I love a slow build horror, but I didn't. In the middle, there were periods where it started to build up the tension, but I don't think it went far enough and kept that tension going throughout the middle of the book, which was a real shame. But then the end was just so good that I kind of, the middle dropped down to a 3 and then the end pulled it back up to a 4 for me.
Yeah. Awesome. Okay. So why don't we just kind of jump right into some of the aspects of the novel, and why don't we start off with the characters? So we can talk about characters that really resonated with us, favorite characters versus, not so favorite, and how we feel about their characterization. So Sarah.
Well, I think as I mentioned a little bit earlier, our main character, Adelaide, it took me kind of a long time to connect to her. But then on reflection, I was sort of like, yes, literally, she is keeping everything that has formed her in terms of grief and trauma and rage, and all of the baggage that she carries with her is quite literally embodied in this trunk that she keeps locked. So you don't get a sense of emotionally, I feel like, what's really motivating her until later on in the novel. You finally start to figure that out and realize what her history has been like and what her upbringing was like, what her life has looked like. So it was one of those things where I was like, why am I not engaging with this character? And then I was like, that's probably intentional, because that's sort of like the point of how she develops over the course of the novel. I really liked the reveal about Grace and her son Sam. Caught me totally off guard. Like the character of Grace, who is basically Adelaide's closest neighbor, but still lives quite a ways away, obviously, because they're homesteading. So it's long distances everywhere. Grace is also a single woman. Her husband is gone, and it's not immediately clear how that's initially happened. She's sort of looked down on by all of the other members of the community. She doesn't seem to have a lot of strong social connections with other people in the town, and it doesn't become clear as to why that is until we realize later on in the book that her son Sam is actually trans. He's a trans boy, and the reason why people in the town are judging Grace is because Grace has chosen to live her life in such a way to let her son be true to his identity, and so that caught me totally off guard, because it it's hard to like sort of figure out as time goes on, like, why are all these townspeople so so kind of like down on this lady, and like, why does she feel so distant from everybody, and what happened to her husband, and like and it doesn't become clear until later on in the book, when one of the upstanding citizens of the local town basically kidnaps Sam and forces him to wear a dress, that you suddenly realize what's going on. So those characters I really liked, and I thought that that was a really, it was an interesting reveal, and it was really heartbreaking, and that aspect of it really spoke to me. And then the other characters, the couple running the laundry, who, oh my god, now I'm blanking on their names. I can't remember their names.
I can't remember anybody's names apart from the main character.
Bertie and Fiona.
Bertie and Fiona, thank you. So I liked those characters as well. There's a real assortment of just like powerful women in this book who have chosen to go to this remote place and just like build a life for themselves in whatever way makes sense for them. And that part of the book I just really liked. I really thought that was really empowering, and it was cool to see all of those characters find each other and sort of triumph in the end. So I really liked that aspect of it.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. I would say that Adelaide, for me, for a good chunk of the book, was one I was very unengaged with. And I'm like, for a protagonist, man, she's just like, like, I'm having a really hard time with her. And then, of course, yeah, as Sarah said, you come to find out why. It's very deliberate on the author's part, because it's interesting that she is a character who has pretty much had to live in isolation, and that is the safety she knows. And even coming to Montana, that is what she clings to. But at the same time, as the story unfolds, you do start to see this desire for connection. She on one hand, she really clings to the safety of isolation, but on the other hand, she's lonely, and she's been alone for so long. I mean, even though she lived with her parents back in California, where they came from, they were essentially an isolated family. They really didn't, because of the secret that they harbored, they did not socialize with the people in their valley. So yeah, I grew to appreciate her more as that story unfolded, as well as Grace too. Like, I had a hard time, it's just one of these things where, in the beginning, I'm just like, wow, these are just, I don't know. I don't really feel that strongly about them. Like, Grace was another. And then with the reveal, I was just like, wow, okay, like, mad respect. Love you so much more. So yeah, I think that those Sam, I loved Sam actually from the very beginning. I thought he was just,
same.
Yeah, he was probably one of my favorite characters. Just a very, yeah, he is just an honest boy, and in the way that he expresses himself and the way that he sees the world, and there's something to him. There is something to him that you detect, and that's the reveal at the end, that in fact he's a trans boy. So yeah. So on the whole, yeah, I would say that those were characters that grew on me. The characters grew on me, I would say. Heather, how about you?
I mean, the same. I really liked the main women. I think they were very well written, especially when you think they were written by a man. I think he writes women very, very well. But I also, I really liked, and this is, bear with me, but I really liked, I cannot remember his name, but the youngest boy from the family that were all you know, that pretended to be blind.
Mhm.
Joab?
What's his name?
Joab, I think. I don't know. I thought
Joab. Yeah.
Yeah.
Like, there were moments, like, as every time I reminded myself that he was a 14-year-old boy,
Mhm.
and you know, there were moments where he was written like a man, like he was having to behave like a man and live like a man, and but he was so nuanced. It would have been so easy to just write him as another one of the villains and like just a bad guy, but then I just think he did a really good job of showing a young boy brought up in really awful circumstances where he's forced in many ways to do some really awful things, and the trauma of that, and the, you know, again, just so desperately wanting to fit in that he's willing to essentially murder his only last living relative in order to continue to fit in. And I just thought he was so, like, he was one of the strongest written characters for me in terms of nuance and depth. And I thought they were all quite well. Some of the characters were weaker, and some of them I thought lacked nuance, but him especially, I thought was very deeply written.
Yeah.
I do think that the book, it did a good job. I feel like, I mean, even for our biggest villains, which are the Reeds, which the sort of couple who are, you know, considered the, you know, sort of main citizens of the near town, which is called Big Sandy. They, you know, they are kind of the, you know, the people who the people who just kind of like run the town in a lot of ways, and they're very wealthy, and they are the ones creating the local opera house, and like, you know, trying to sort of like bring civilization to this town of Big Sandy, but are, you know, obviously very yeah, are quite villainous in terms of, you know, how they actually end up, you know, the husband is part of this crowd called the Stranglers, who seem to be big fans of lynching people, and then the wife is basically like running all of the local minority owned businesses like out of business. Like they're really terrible people. But then we also find out that like part of what motivates them is that the wife has given birth to a monster at one point. And so it really, like, everybody in the book is like really shaped by the trauma of their past. You know, even the villains are shaped by the trauma of their past. And so I think that aspect of it was interesting. Like there's a lot to be revealed about all of the people, you know, in the book, and what they've gone through, and how that, you know, sets up their motivations in the future. So
I also really liked Grace. I think once we started to get those moments, those like just random moments of hearing her thoughts, I thought even Grace was really well written and really nuanced and well developed.
Yeah. I mean, the part where she slapped Mrs. Reed, I was like, what the hell just happened? You know, because you know, so it was one of those scenes where, to me, I thought at first, like, that seems very out of character, very out of the blue. And I think it's one thing that Victor LaValle does well, where he introduces these little scenes and these actions, and you don't quite get the, you know, the scope of it and what's behind that until you get more towards the end. I was like, oh, that was why.
Yeah, see, I did guess that that's where Sam's story was going, purely because I knew that there was transphobia as one of the trigger warnings for the book.
Okay.
And also that was the moment where I figured it out, because Mrs. Reed says something about working on Sam's presentation, and then Grace slaps her, and I was like, oh wait, I think I know where this is going then. And there was a lot of conversation in the build up to that about how the children are uncomfortable around Sam, and that's why the school won't work and stuff. So I figured out, because I knew that there was transphobia as a trigger warning, that that's where Sam's story was going. So the reveal of that wasn't quite as impactful as it would have been if I hadn't seen the trigger warnings first.
Gotcha.
But
Yeah, see, I was anticipating it to go a completely different way with Sam, because I feel like some of the other things about Sam, he had some very particular like fixations on certain topics and
Yeah.
like very specific things he was interested in. So I was thinking autism is
Mm.
what I was thinking about Sam, and so which may also that I mean
May
that
also
very
be
well
a case,
may
yeah.
but so I totally did not make that leap. But it made perfect sense. Like once you find out, it's like, oh, okay, like everything now about Grace and like how she lives makes sense, and about how how people treat Sam, how people treat her, and how she was able to find sort of a kindred spirit in Adelaide. Like all of that made more sense. So
there was just some really subtle moments with characters, things he had characters say and do that they were actually really powerful. Like when there's just a moment where Mrs. Reed says to Adelaide, "Look, they could accept her murdering her husband." Like everybody was fine with that because they understood he was a bit of a git, but allowing her trans boy to live in the way that was most comfortable to him was not acceptable in any way. And it was just, and it's like literally just almost one throwaway sentence that just packs such a punch behind it.
Yeah. I love this comment. Sam was such a breath of fresh air because he was the only one that was living completely in his truth. And that is totally true. That is totally true. Yeah.
That's why he was one of my favorites. And I like Sarah, I thought maybe, maybe he's on the spectrum. And that's why, we're getting that little, we get these tastes of, especially in the way he expresses himself. So I did not, the reveal was not expecting that. I definitely was not. And then, after that reveal, I was like, okay, now this makes sense. Now this makes more sense. So, okay. Let's see what else. So anything else in terms of characters? I mean, ones that you had certain maybe problems with or felt, you were your least favorite, least developed.
So I feel like we are not talking about the elephant in the room or monster in the trunk, as it were, Elizabeth. And so as anybody knows,
I meant when I was talking about the clips from the monster, I meant Elizabeth, not Grace.
Oh, wait, what?
Huh?
When I was saying I even liked Grace, and I didn't mean Grace, I meant Elizabeth. When I said when you
figured out
got clips from
her,
getting the bits from her sister.
Got it.
So and that was something that I thought was really interesting because I wasn't sure, like I was sort of iffy on how well it worked, to have these parts told from Elizabeth's point of view, because you could, I mean, they were almost written like as sort of free form poetry, I guess, everything from Elizabeth's point of view, but also like you could not have had that book without giving Elizabeth a voice, like as a character. Like the whole point of the book was that, a character like Elizabeth is entitled to a voice as well. And so so that was one of those things where I was like, okay, like I understand why this has to be this way. Like I wasn't completely sure that it would 100% worked just from a writing standpoint, but it was really important to ensure that as a character, she was able to give her truth as well. So I don't know what you guys thought about that.
Yeah, I would say Elizabeth for me was also a bit tricky because I actually did really enjoy her. I really did enjoy her, and even from the beginning, even though she did some terrible shit, I'm like, I think there's something more behind this. And I think I almost kind of wanted more in certain respects, because I think I wanted more of glimpses into the life in California. We do find out, she was essentially kept in a barn. She was imprisoned in a barn. We do find out that Adelaide is the only one who is able to handle her because she's full of these sharp scales, and she's got an enormous head, and she has wings, right? She has claws. She's essentially, monstrous. And Adelaide is the only one who is able to handle her. And so I don't know, I just felt myself just more curious about her, and that wasn't really satisfied in the novel for me, because it's like, okay, so is Elizabeth we get the sense, especially as the novel progresses, that she is an intelligent being.
Mm-hmm.
So how does that influence how she was treated? I mean, did none of this come to light in her life in California? How do these things play out in California? Is it that because of her imprisonment, like, was she, savage from birth, or was she able to relay some of this intelligence? Like, I guess I want a little more from the life before.
Mm-hmm.
And then even in the way that Adelaide seems to have this like almost supernatural ability to calm her and get her to go back inside her fucking steamer trunk. I'm like, well, that's magic. Like, let me sing you a lullaby, and she's just gonna fall into a trance and crawl back crawl back into her steamer trunk, which, by the way, has been kicked and dropped and scraped and all along this journey, and she don't make a peep. She doesn't make a peep at all, and I'm just like, how, like, why? Like, these are the details that I kind of was left like not quite satisfied with. And just like, even the fact that, like, Adelaide, it's like, okay, lady, yes, please do just leave that steamer trunk right in like the middle of your living room where everyone can see it and be curious as to what's in there and why it's locked. And okay, and now you're going to belatedly drag it down to the basement and hide it after somebody's been almost like mauled and killed. Like, just things like that. I'm like, but yeah, I think I wanted more of her. And I don't necessarily know how I would characterize her, especially in the end. She has agency to kill versus not to kill. In the end, she's adored by children and adults alike, and so it is kind of those details that I don't necessarily feel I've made my peace with, I guess I should. And I really, really enjoyed her.
I see, it's interesting because I'm listening to you, and all the things that you're saying, I disagree with, in in the nicest way. I think that because I think like the central point of the book in some ways was that none of that stuff mattered because Elizabeth wasn't the monster, and she wasn't the thing that we were supposed to focus our attention. I can't speak on. She was like. So and I'm also willing to accept quite a lot, as long as the book is like, this makes sense because it makes sense in this world that I've written. I'm like, sure, okay, why not? And I can kind of live with that. And I thought the end did a really good job, again, I think one of the things I like about Victor LaValle for me is that the way that he writes, he makes really strong points without ever saying them. And I think the fact that, like, at the end, she was loved by the townspeople and the children loved her and all that kind of stuff was such a testament to how she was a product. Again, she was a product of the way that she was treated and she was raised. She looked different. And so her family immediately assumed that she was evil and dangerous and just locked her up. And so she behaved that way. And once she stopped being treated that way, she became kind and good and interesting and was able to really just be in the same way that everybody else is allowed to just be. And sometimes they do good things and sometimes they do bad things and sometimes they make good mistakes. And good mistakes? No. I mean, you can make good mistakes, I suppose. And I just thought I thought the way that he handled Elizabeth was really subtle, and I actually really appreciated that. I didn't want more because I think too much more would have been too heavy-handed in what I think he was trying to do with her character and what he was trying to show with her character.
Yeah, I mean, to some extent, I do agree with that, because I guess, for me, and we talked about some of this when we talked about Nettle and Bone too. Like, there are certain aspects of a story that when they feel like they're presenting themselves as maybe a fable or an allegory, I'm more able to suspend disbelief about certain things. And so, and Elizabeth, there certain aspects of her felt more like a fable or an allegory, like when you compare, like, Elizabeth being, Adelaide's sort of like dark other half, or just sister, her kind of alter ego in certain ways. Like, there obviously Elizabeth is a character in and of herself, but both of them are expressions of how of how trauma, trauma from your upbringing, trauma from, going through life being different from the people around you. All of those things are going to shape who you become. And then, in the case of Elizabeth, she is treated like a monster, so she becomes a monster. And in Adelaide's case, she's treated like she doesn't belong, so she acts like she doesn't belong. So for me, it was easier to accept the sort of unexplained, like, yes, Elizabeth's locked in a trunk, and it's like, okay, yes, that's an allegory for like how your rage and your trauma and all of the things that shaped you might keep locked away inside yourself the same way as Adelaide does. So it, like, that aspect of it, to me, I guess I didn't have as much of a problem with, because again, it read more like a fable in some ways, or like symbolism. And so it was easier for me to accept. One thing that I did think, though, is that the one thing that happened where I was like, okay, I need more here, is when Elizabeth meets the Mexican couple who are living in the mountains, and they say that she's a goddess.
Yeah.
And I was like, wait a second. Okay, no, tell me more about this. Because, obviously in some ways it's about, like, yes, seeing somebody from a different perspective, completely changes, it changes how you think of what they're capable of, and what they represent, and who they are. But I also was like, okay, no, tell me more about what this means to Elizabeth to have somebody say this to her. Like, so that was one of those things where I felt like it just sort of happened, and then that thread was kind of dropped. And I wish that I had been able to know more about what that meant for Elizabeth, to have somebody say that to her. So anyway, yeah.
Yeah, I agree with that too. When I read that part, I'm like, oh, okay, so there's another added layer here that we're going to maybe find out about to help maybe round out Elizabeth, more in the literal sense, and that never came to pass. So, I mean, for me, while I understood the connections that LaValle was trying to make, and the symbolism, and what he was trying to do, and appreciated all of that, there was a part of me that still wanted it to be, I guess, more well-rounded in a more kind of literal narrative sense.
You wanted it to be more concrete.
A little bit more, because it didn't read necessarily like a fable to me. I mean, especially given, like, we're in this kind of, given it is paranormal, but we're in this very realistic landscape of, traveling from California into Big Sandy, Montana, with this very specific setting. And it speaks to the historical happenings in the U.S. at that time. So to me, I was expecting there to be more grounding in that realism from a historical aspect, and so I guess that kind of branched off into, am I wanting other things to be well-rounded? Yes, metaphorically, great. Also, and maybe this goes into world building as to, like, but I don't want to know, like. There seems to be this kind of paranormal aspect or supernatural aspect to certain things. And I almost would have liked maybe a little, I don't need an encyclopedia, but just maybe, a little more time devoted to some of these details. So, especially given that I really liked Elizabeth. I
guess for me, because there were other sort of paranormal or supernatural aspects of the story too, like the ghost town, and there's like actual ghosts in the ghost town, like there's, and that's something that I really like. I really like in fantasy a very grounded setting where the supernatural stuff is just kind of creeping in around the edges. Like, that's one of my favorite types of book, is that feeling where you feel so grounded in reality, and yet things that aren't really part of reality are just kind of peeking in around the edges. That's like one of my favorite things. And so I don't necessarily always need more, to sort of accept, like, you go to a ghost town, there's ghosts, there's angry miners, living in this ghost town who have never left, like the things like that. I guess I just sort of, like, I don't know. I like it. I find it easier to accept.
I like it too. I
So.
totally like it too. And in those instances, it's interesting, right? I accepted those things without even thinking about it. But I think with Elizabeth, because I was more invested in her, because she does play a crucial role in the narrative, I did want a little more in certain places. Robin is saying, she's asleep in the trunk. It's like Jeannie's genie bottles in there. Like, what's up? And then that is the thing, just in terms of her behavior, even like how she is kept in that trunk and yet so serene and tranquil, and she's not moving at all, and she's not doing anything, and people like she doesn't. She doesn't ever move. Like people don't ever suspect that there's some like there's an actual like physical thing in there. She is in fact a physical thing.
Mm-hmm.
There was a moment. I mean, they revealed that there was a monster in the trunk way earlier than I thought they were going to.
Yeah,
but then, of course, the reveal wasn't that she had a monster in a trunk. The reveal was that her monster was her sister. Yeah. And that did take me by surprise. And that was a moment where it finished the chapter on that, and I went, "Oh my God!" as I was reading it. So that I thought that was really well handled. But there was a moment where I wondered if it was going to be more of like a Jekyll and Hyde thing, and that there actually wasn't anything in the trunk at all, and that it was just Adelaide who was like losing parts of time, because they did the whole thing with the hotel where she fell asleep and then all of a sudden it was daytime and she seemed to have lost track of all this time. And I was like, oh, maybe there isn't a monster. Maybe Adelaide is actually the monster. But then it didn't go in that direction at all. And then I was like, why did we do the losing track of time thing in the hotel? What were we foreshadowing there? Because it didn't go anywhere.
Well, and I mean that one point, with the Mudges and everything, and her finding her that trunk had actually been unlocked. I was like, ooh, is there something like with the Mudges? Like, did they? Because did they try to open it? Like, what's going on? And that didn't seem to that didn't pan out in that way at all. But that was a very interesting scene. So, okay, why don't we move on to plot, and just kind of talk about how we thought the plot worked out. Maybe some parts that really resonated and others that didn't work so well. Sarah?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's interesting. I think we're kind of talking about
all together
already, because I do think that it definitely, and understandably so, like, obviously to make the mystery of the trunk be the actual mystery of the trunk, there was some misdirection that he was engaging in early parts of the novel so that we wouldn't actually figure out what was going on with the trunk, and that on purpose we would have all of these ideas of what might be in the trunk. So I can kind of forgive that because that made it fun. But yeah, I mean, I think from a plot standpoint, I mean, I thought it was good. I think one of the things that I think is really interesting is the happy ending. Like, it was a book where I didn't anticipate there being just a happy ending, and I loved that there was, I loved that there ended up being a happy ending for these characters. And like, it just was such a sense of relief to know that like they were able to, find a place where they could all just be, and be themselves and be safe and, create their own like happy society, and not have the sort of inevitability of racism and sexism and transphobia and like all of the things that would prevent people like that from normally being happy in that era of history from actually being happy. Like that just, I don't know, that just, it was sort of like the moment at the end of Get Out where the cop car shows up and you're like, oh no, and then it turns out to be Rod. Like that, it's one of those things where you're like, it feels so earned, because it's just like, you're so ready for the worst to happen and then it doesn't, and then it's just like, oh, so I really like that. But I don't know how you guys felt about it, because I think that the ending, from what I read, I was reading some reviews online and stuff, and it sounded like it might have been a little controversial to just have it end in just such a happy way. So
I can kind of see why it would have been. I personally really enjoyed the ending as well. I really loved it. I mean, that was the kind of redeeming factor. Like that last portion of the novel was the redeeming factor for me, because I guess even plot wise, I mean, I almost DNF'd it, and I was like, a little over halfway through, and I'm like, I'm just not being grabbed at all. Like, this is not a page turner. I You know, it's supposed to be horror. I'm not
Mhm.
there. It just doesn't feel like, I don't feel very, there's no tension here for me, etc. I mean, in terms of plot sequence, I mean, it's fine the way he
Mhm.
wrote it. It's fine, and yet it didn't grab me. But it wasn't until, yeah, toward the end where I was like, okay, now things are happening. Now we're getting somewhere, and now things are being revealed. It's coming together, and I really loved the happy ending. I
Mhm.
mean, sometimes, and I'm like, is this too pat? Like, is this too like what's that term? Like Deus Ex Machina, where like it's just like, it's like, oh, this very pat, very convenient ending to just kind of wrap things up nicely in a bow. We'll set a fire,
Mhm.
because we did that before in the beginning,
Mhm.
at Adelaide's old farmhouse. Just set that fire, and no one will question like what
Mm.
happened there. And we'll set a fire again here, and massacre will be just go away, and then move to this town. And I still loved it. I still loved
Mhm.
it. We were able to, even with all that and those thoughts, I was still able to be like, well, I just actually really liked that they are happy, and that Elizabeth is, people are now loving her and respecting her, and she's able to, like, and they're all free in a sense. They've all been freed of yeah, just. Or coming to grips with and finding more closure in a lot of the baggage, and in like the family they've chosen with each other, because
Mhm.
it's funny, we're talking about lone women as the title, and yet what I really loved was that they came together. And
Mhm.
so, where I mean, for me, it was very much about the connections, and
Mhm.
finding that in other people,
Mhm.
where amidst the extreme, traumas and isolation and distrust,
Mhm.
essentially. So yeah, I
Mhm.
loved it.
Yeah. I think one of the things that I kind of found interesting about it too is that I think, when you think about like because the way the ending wraps up, again, it feels a little bit like a fable. There was this paradise town of women in Montana, and nobody really knew where it was, but
You'll never
it's
find it on a
you'll
map.
never, you'll never find it on a map, I liked that because it's sort of, so much of the book is sort of about like these interstices of history, I guess, the things that we never think about, like, oh, Black women really were able to go to Montana and prove up a claim. Like, I didn't know that was a thing, and it was a real thing apparently, and that's what inspired him to write the book.
Mhm.
And just so the idea that there might have been this
Secret
town,
town.
this
Yeah.
secret town that it existed, but we don't know where it was, and it was magical. I don't know. I kind of like that as sort of saying, like this thing could have happened in history and we would never know, because so many of the things in this book might have happened in history and we would never know. I kind of like that. So
Mm.
Robin is
I,
saying,
I also actually really liked the ending.
yeah.
I felt like it was really earned as well, which made a difference.
mhm,
Mhm. Yeah, Robin is saying that that the endings, what the author wished for, the problems of the world, felt like him being like, if I could write a happy ending for the world, this would be that ending.
Mm. And
Um,
it was on point for the theme as well. The theme was about being different and finding your own community and all of, finding a space where you feel safe and all of that kind of stuff. I think it worked well with the themes that he was
mhm.
going with. But
Yeah.
other than the ending, just talking about the plot in
Mhm.
general,
Mhm.
I there's so much about this book that worked for me. Like there's so much about this that is just my favorite kind of horror. Like it
mhm,
was isolated, small town, paranoia, the monster's not really the bad guy, the people are
mhm,
really the bad guys. There was so much of this that I just loved because it's
mhm,
the type of horror that I'm absolutely 100% in for. But there was a point in the middle for me where the plot was too historical fiction and
mhm,
not enough horror.
mhm,
And I don't read historical fiction for the
mhm,
most part, unless it's a part of history that I'm very, very already interested in and aware of. It's not my genre of taste.
mhm,
And so there were periods in the middle where I was bored
mhm,
to be with the plot. I found the plot a little bit boring. But I thought the beginning was just so good. Like it just opened with this like, I'm sorry, we're doing what now? We're
yeah.
setting fire to your
Oh
dead
yeah.
parent.
Yeah.
Okay.
totally started with a bang. Like,
okay, so that's how we're going. And then it you know, and then there was like little moments like the hotel and, you know, and stuff. And then it just really lulled in the middle.
Mhm.
And then the end was very stressful. There were moments at the end where I was very stressed about what was going to happen to these people and finding it very difficult to read.
Yeah, I think, and maybe that lull in the middle that you're talking about, Heather, was maybe around the same spot where I was like, do I DNF this? Like, I'm just really not, I'm not sure. It's because it was one of those things where it's like, I want to know what happens. I want to know what happens to Elizabeth and like to these people. And yet it just wasn't a page turner. It like, I don't know. I can't even pinpoint. Yeah, I wasn't, I guess, sucked in really to it. So yeah, whereas the beginning, wow, holy crap, we're just in the middle of things right out of the gate, amazing. And then then the momentum dies down and I was like, oh, I just don't know. But I'm glad I stuck with it because yeah, it was great.
I do agree. I'm not a big, I don't, you know, I've only read a few Westerns in my entire life. I've read like Lonesome Dove and I like can't even think of any others. So yeah.
I've read The Gunslinger by Stephen King, but I'm not entirely sure that counts.
Yeah.
That's the only
There's some Western elements. Yeah. I have, like I said, I've read like Lonesome Dove is one of the best books I've ever. I mean, that's an amazing book, but I have not read very many Westerns in my life, and so that setting, I guess, it's not a setting that I'm normally super interested in, but because it was addressing an aspect of history that I was totally unaware existed. I think that is maybe why I found it more interesting. I don't know. I guess I sort of felt like the middle, you know, obviously the middle was lighter on the horror and heavier on the history, but in a way it was sort of like you kind of see the horrors of history brewing, you know, you start to see like this is the shit that people had to go through at this period of history. Not that it's actually changed all that much in the last 100 years, but you know, there's I don't know that when you first read the beginning, and Adelaide is just kind of like making her way through the world and making her way to Montana. Everything seems like it's a little bit more welcoming than I initially expected, you know, like I was expecting that journey to be a lot more difficult for her and for her to face a lot more like rejection and a lot more a lot more antagonism and a lot, you know, like obviously she did face some of that, but it was less than I was expecting. But then subtly over the course of the middle of the book, people's motivations and feelings start becoming clearer and clearer and clearer. And it starts, I don't know, it starts building up. For me, it was building up more tension in terms of just like, you know, oh my God, from like a real world perspective, things are going to be as hard for Adelaide as I was initially expecting, notwithstanding kind of how much easier it seemed like it was at the beginning of the book, just in terms of coming to Big Sandy, settling there, the way people treated her, you know, like it was mostly at the beginning relatively like respectful and relatively friendly and, you know, not too, you know, people weren't like overtly super racist to her or anything like that. And I was like, oh, okay. And then time goes on and you're like, oh, okay. Yeah. Okay.
I thought that was really well done though, right? Because I think it could have been really easy to just really go heavy on the rich white racist people in a very overt way. But I think having it be so subtle really shows just how insidious it is and how like it's just so I just think he did it really well. And I think it was the right choice. Where and even when you first see Mrs. Reed at the train station, like there's a moment where you think, oh, rich white woman, I bet she's going to be awful, and then she isn't. But then and then there's just small moments where she does stuff and you're like, wait, is this going where I think it's going? Because that was a weird choice of phrasing, or I just think it built up to that so well. And then you find out that her husband's just riding around the area lynching people.
Exactly.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I think I had mentioned to you too, like before, because that beginning was like not very antagonistic. It was, the interactions were very welcoming and accepting. I forgot that that I literally was imagining some of these people to be Black.
Mhm.
Like, just because I'm like, well, no, like in this type of setting, given the historically, the time and the setting, no, White people aren't going to be nice to her. And so like, and yet these people are. And so like for a moment, like I kept imagining Grace is Black, and I'm like, no, they're all white. They're all white. Matthew and Finn kept thinking Matthew was Black. No, he's a white dude. He's a white dude. Like I just kept, because they're all, there isn't that
Overt racism.
And that does upset expectations in the beginning, which I do agree works well as we progress, and how that sets things up for later and the characterizations later. So yeah.
And you start seeing the subtle microaggressions grow and grow and grow and grow. Yeah, he did a really good job of that. So yeah.
I agree. So Blue is saying, I read the reviews midway to see if I'd be mad by the end. I was tempted. I was actually tempted to do something similar, where it's like, maybe I should read some stuff, or maybe I should just skip to the end. Like, but I didn't. Yeah. So anyway, hi, Kathy.
Yay, another Lonesome Dove fan.
And put your boots away. Oh yeah. I have not read this. I have not read this at all.
No, it's so good.
Is it? Okay.
It's wonderful. And also the TV miniseries is wonderful if you ever get a chance. I'm not a Western person, but I love Lonesome Dove. It's such a good book, such a good miniseries, like just so good. So yeah, highly recommend.
All right. I actually do like Westerns. I mean, I think it's because I grew up watching Westerns with my dad.
That's why I don't like them, because my parents are obsessed with Westerns, and we watched so many when I was young, and I'm like, no.
Okay. No, I grew up on those.
If you want me to watch a Western, it needs to be made by Quentin Tarantino, I'm afraid, because that's the only one I like.
Especially back then. I mean, you look at them now; they're very problematic.
Yeah.
It's what I grew up on Westerns with my dad, as well as those Planet of the Apes movies. And Bruce Lee. Those were the three main.
Three
main things I grew up with. So, okay. Moving on to world building. So, and I feel like we've been talking a lot about the world building. But so I get the sense that with both of you, you feel like actually the world building worked out very well, and that the author did a great job.
Yeah. Again, I really like a very grounded setting with the supernatural peeking in around the edges. That's like one of my favorite types of world building in a book. Like I just always enjoy that. So I liked it.
I thought it was done like well enough that there was a lot of things that were unexplained. Like, why are these women giving birth to monsters and stuff? I think he built his world for me. He built his world so well that, again, like I said, I was totally willing to accept it as just the norm in this particular version of the world that we're living in. Like, sometimes women just give birth to monsters. That's, like, just what happens in this world. Like, nobody knows why. And, some people have slightly weird abilities, and there's just ghosts hanging around in abandoned towns and stuff. And I think it was so easy for me to accept it, which is a testament, I think, to how well he built that world and just made it all seem perfectly. I mean, it just felt really realistic.
Yeah. I mean, for my part, like, and it could be that there were parts where, because I wasn't as engaged, maybe I wasn't paying as much attention, but there were times I thought, the setting, just in terms of like some of the sensory details and just my getting a vivid picture of Big Sandy itself didn't necessarily come through all the time. Just that in juxtaposition with maybe her life back in California, what we're seeing now, there's supposed to be, more challenging and with its own set of difficulties and its own landscape and everything like that. So sometimes I maybe would have wanted more, but then at the same time, I feel like it's to me, it was just so much more about the characters as well, and the fact that wherever Adelaide would go, trying to escape California, trying to make it, as a lone woman here in Montana, and having, but at the end of the day, for me anyway, it was less about the setting as it was the connections. She found her true home with the people that she made connections with, and with the acceptance of and the acknowledgement of her own, dark feelings and her own trauma and the things that she suppressed. And then with acceptance of Elizabeth too. So, I mean, in that way, like, it actually didn't bother me all that much.
The only thing I did struggle with, and it made no difference to the story whatsoever, but was just getting a sense of the size of the place that we were talking about. And I think it was just, it's an American author writing about an American space. So I think it was, on some parts, it was just like a given for him that his audience would understand the size of the area that he's talking about, and how isolated these people in each of these houses actually are. But I come from a teeny tiny little island.
Yeah.
And so trying to think about I still think you two can pop into each other's houses for a cup of tea.
Right.
Because you're on the same piece of island.
Right.
No, it's like thousands of miles away.
Yeah. So just getting that sense of perspective of just how isolated Adelaide was when she was in her house.
Yeah.
Was something I really struggled with envisioning, and he didn't really bother. And I think he didn't bother because it wasn't necessarily pivotal to the story making sense, but also I think he didn't really bother to labor that too much, because he is maybe he assumed that the large majority of his audience would have just a bigger area of
like a mental, like, we actually talked about this a little bit, because I think you both said neither of you have been to Montana, right?
Correct.
I don't even know where Montana is in the map.
Bozeman, briefly in Bozeman, driving into Yellowstone. So that's about all I.
And see, I've been to Montana many times, and so I have a very strong mental picture. I've driven multiple times across the entirety of Montana, which is a long ass drive, and so I think having a mental picture of what that looks like definitely helps, with the book, because I never had any difficulty envisioning anything. It was like I could imagine Big Sandy and imagine exactly what this little town standing out in the middle of nowhere on the plains looks like, and what her house looks like, and how all of that looks. And but that also is partially because I've been there. Like, I've actually been there, and so I know how that landscape feels. And so I think it didn't even occur to me until I was talking to you guys that it might be hard to envision sometimes, like, exactly how it would feel. So
it was for me, and especially given, again, in some ways, what that setting is metaphorical too, and how that lends to the story of their character development. I was just like, I would love to feel more of this vastness and the cold and the isolation and the separating distance between people, and I just don't, again, like Heather said, it wasn't pivotal, to my understanding everything that happened, but it was, I don't know if either of you have ever read Ethan Frome, but that's a novel in which setting is very much its own character in the story. That it's in like New England, I think. It's like snowy and stark and vast, and it really lends to the tone and the mood, and helps to augment like what the characters are going through, and to metaphorically just kind of symbolize a lot of what they're going through and how they're feeling, and so in that way, I think this could have done the same. Not that it needed it, or not that it was unsuccessful because it wasn't there, but
I do wonder, and I don't know, there's just no way for me to know the answer to this, so I'm just thinking out loud, but I wonder if that middle bit wouldn't have felt quite like such a lull if I had more of a concept, because like for the middle, there was a lot around her just being alone and being in this space alone, and I think if I'd had more of a concept of what that actually meant, I think I maybe had been able to understand the tension that he was trying to build with those parts of the book. But because my brain can't, my brain just can't think of land masses in that size, I think some of that tension that was where he was using the landscape to build it
Mhm.
just was lost on me,
Right.
was completely lost on me.
Yeah.
Yeah. And if you haven't read any other I mean, I've read the Little House on the Prairie series like a dozen times in my life, like I read those books initially as a kid, and it's the same kind of setting, it's a vast, obviously lots of problematic elements in those books as well, but like it's a setting where people are homesteading, it's literally the same thing. It's in different parts of the country, but it's the same idea of, you get this big parcel of land and you have to go actually live on it for a certain amount of time. And then if you can do that successfully, it belongs to you. And it's, trying to single-handedly make a living, build a house and, farm and grow your own food and sustain yourself on this big parcel of land far away from anybody else. Like, I don't know, I think just having more experience, like reading about that historical setting and more about what it's kind of like. I think it just like depends on what other historical fiction you've read and that kind of thing too. So yeah.
That's very true.
Mhm.
Okay. So anything else we want to talk about? Any other aspects of the novel that we didn't touch on that you wanted to discuss? Anything you really, really hated, really especially loved? I wasn't the biggest fan of all the animal violence. Horses being split into poor Obadiah.
Yeah, I know. I feel so bad for Obadiah.
Oh my God. Yeah. So like, it
He
was
was a good boy. He was a good boy, and he met a terrible end. Yeah.
such a good boy. For that to be his ending, that really pissed me off.
Mhm.
So yeah.
But
You know
again,
what's
it's true to the historical setting. People were less sentimental about animals too.
animals, yeah. And but what was really interesting, and it only kind of really, as I was making the connections after I'd finished it, but it's very similar in terms of the way that it tells the story and the way that it uses the monster to talk about the people on this isolated island. It's very similar to Midnight Mass, the TV show.
Mm.
But I mean, the main difference with Midnight Mass is the ending is not happy at all. It's actually very sad and difficult, the ending of Midnight Mass. But it had very, Midnight Mass isn't about racism. It is more about like small town mentality and fear and the way that small isolated towns behave in fearful situations and stuff. But it had some very similar themes, which I really enjoyed.
Awesome. So then to round out this conversation, would you read something else by Victor LaValle and recommend this book to others?
Well, I've already bought another one of his books, which is The Changeling, which is a TV show now. And it came up on a Kindle sale, like for $1.99. So I bought it because I did really like his writing. And so I'm interested in, and I've heard a lot about that book and that book is really good. So I'm definitely interested in reading that one. So yeah, I mean, this book, I think like, again, it would sort of depend on how people feel about historical fiction and whether or not they think that they would be interested in the setting. But I did like the book. I thought it was well done. And so yeah, it would depend on the person as to whether or not I'd recommend it, but I'm definitely interested in reading more books by him. So
Heather?
Yeah, definitely. That is the one that I actually want to read next, The Ballad of Black Tom. I've heard such good things about that book, such good things, and from like booktubers who I know I have very similar tastes to. So, and I originally intended to try and get hold of that one first before we ended up reading this one. But I really liked his writing style. I think he's got a subtlety that I just appreciate in horror and particularly, so definitely.
So then would you to say that it's an accurate classification to call this a horror novel?
Yes, I mean I would. I think it's horror in a historical setting more than anything else, but
Okay.
I'd agree. Yeah. So it wasn't I mean, it wasn't like super scary horror,
Yeah.
you know, but I think of any classification, you know, it's a horror / Western
I
slash
mean,
historical.
horror doesn't always have to be like super in your face scary. Like some
Exactly.
of the best horror is that creepy, like unsettling,
Mhm.
something is going on here and I can't quite put my finger on what it is or where it's going. And sometimes that's the best horror.
Mhm. Mhm.
And maybe that's for me where is where it lagged because of expectations. And I don't read a lot of horror. I mean, I've certainly watched a lot of horror, although not recently, but so maybe my expectation was like, oh, like I want to be scared. I want this tension to be so ramped up and like I want to be on the edge of my seat. And it just wasn't even the scenes that were meant to be, I guess, horror. They're just like,
Mhm.
oh, that happened.
Yeah.
Interesting. You know, so yeah. But
Oh, the floor of the opera house is slick with blood. Okay, yeah.
okay.
Yeah.
Elizabeth just totally disemboweled all those people.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Go,
All right.
Elizabeth.
Very much. Hey. Oh, good job.
Kill those weeds.
It really was. I was like, well, that solves that problem. Yeah, no, I would say similarly that depending on the person and what I knew of their tastes, I would certainly recommend it if they are more inclined for like that historical literary type of fiction. Yeah, I would recommend this book. I'm not opposed to reading anything else, like other things by Victor LaValle. I'm not I'm not jumping at just because this one was, while the ending definitely paid off and made it worth it. Like I don't know that all his other novels are that way, or that I would really want to read a novel like that, keep reading novels like that. But I really did. Again, it was one of those like mind emotion things. From like a mind standpoint, I really appreciated this novel. But yeah, it's just yeah, for a good chunk of it, I just wasn't maybe emotionally invested up until the end. And then it's like, oh wow, okay. So yeah, that's so I don't know. I just kind of I don't know really what to feel about this novel. Yeah. But that
Yeah.
is pretty much it. Are we missing anything else? Okay, Gigi is saying I've read The Changeling and The Ballad of Black Tom and like both of them. Okay.
Good to
And
know. No?
is he predominantly like a standalone novel writer? No,
I think so, yeah. And I think horror is his
horror
wheelhouse
is
as well. I think they're all some version of
horror.
horror.
Got
I mean,
it.
The Ballad of Black Tom definitely is. I believe The Changeling is as well, is
Okay.
ultimately a horror story.
Oh, okay. Good to know. Good to know. Okay. So I think that wraps up this conversation of Lone Women. Thank you so much for everyone who popped in and engaged with the conversation. And just an FYI, we had scheduled a Three Girls, One Deck for October 12th, but because of a scheduling conflict, we're going to have to move that. So stay tuned for when that will actually be. But just to let you know, it will not be happening on the 12th. But yeah, keep an eye out and we will let you know. And I believe that's everything, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
So thanks again, everyone. This was a lot of fun. I will go ahead and put up our outro.
Yay.
Yay. We'll catch you in the next video. Thank you.
Bye, everybody.